Hello, this is, of course, the Brett Davis podcast coming to you from Coronado, California. I'm very blessed to have Army veteran Ryan Landry here today. That's a very imposing photo of you up there.
I appreciate that.
And you have a very interesting story. Of course, you're a podcast host as well,
Yes.
and a former military.
Yes.
Which branch?
Army.
Army. How many years?
8 years.
How was that? And tell me how it added to your life.
So I was kind of a late bloomer going in the military. I went to college for a couple years, but that sense of service was always with me. I did 2 years of college and then decided, you know what, I'm not doing enough, and went into the military in 2009 and hit the ground running and didn't look back. It was a great experience for me. Builds great structure and gave me the motivation and dedication that I have now.
So, did you have any tours?
Yes. We went, I was with 2nd Cavalry Regiment, which is stationed out of Germany. We went to Afghanistan 2010 to 2011. We were in just north of Tarankot and the Dairwood area of Afghanistan.
Thank you for your service.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for all that you do. You're also involved with law enforcement.
I am. Yep. I've been a police officer for the last decade. It's a town that I grew up in Norwich, Connecticut, and I love it. The sense of service continued. I took one uniform off and I put on another.
Well, thank you for that too. I mean, it's overwhelming because I know how many challenges that are going on in the country these days with, our veterans and our law enforcement. And I take my hat off to you for that, and really appreciate it. I know a lot of people appreciate what you're doing.
I appreciate the support. I really do.
So, how did you get into podcasting? Because you are an interesting guy. So, I mean, did you feel you had some stories to tell, or were you fascinated? What was the reason?
Yeah. So it's a combination, a culmination of many things. Some of it has to do with policing, getting those calls for veterans in crisis, going to the suicidal veterans overdose, veterans that have committed suicide. Me personally, I've lost a battle buddy that I served with in Germany and Afghanistan, and I felt like there was a need to do more. And everybody does their own little part, and it was time for me to step up and do mine. And Everlasting Veteran is the vessel, not just for me, but all veterans to be able to tell their story to help other veterans.
Has there been an improvement with suicides in the military? Have you seen improvements? I heard a stat a while back. You know the current stats on that?
So I did an episode that, everybody's heard about 22 No More.
Yeah.
Everybody's heard about, Man 22 Suicide Awareness Run, which is in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Ranger Rick, which I'll be having come on my show, runs that. I personally want to dive deeper into it. The VA puts out those numbers. Unfortunately, the VA's numbers are skewed because what happens is the VA does not count the self-injury deaths as suicides. They count as self-injury. So the real numbers are more 44 veterans a day.
So they're about 50% off?
They're about 50% off. Almost more than 10,000 veterans a year are committing suicide.
Okay. So again, you said suicide, and then you also said injuries.
Yes.
So are those 10,000 are we counting injuries as well?
Yes. Yeah. So that's the numbers from American Warrior Project, which they have done their own study and dove into the VA's numbers in which they've come up with. And those are estimated numbers the VA comes up with. Unfortunately, what happens a lot of times is they come up with some numbers for a certain amount a year. They bring up statistics to help with funding for certain things. They don't do any follow-up afterwards. And what happens is many veterans feel like they're left by the wayside. They're forgotten. That happened with Vietnam. That happened with, Iraq, Afghanistan, and many veterans that even now have not transitioned out will soon, or hopefully not, but will soon feel that sense of purpose is lost. And where do I regain it? In a lot of those situations, every veteran faces, everybody's story is different. Everybody's transition's different. And that's what I'm trying to embody with Everlasting Veteran, so that every single veteran can hear that your story is worth hearing. because everybody's transition is different.
So, I mean, this is a very, as you know, complex situation that's been going on for a while. And why do you think the VA can't get a handle on any of it?
A lot of it has to do with numbers of how many veterans are transitioning out of the military. 200,000 plus a year transitioning out of the military. The VA, just with VA claims alone, in which I personally had to go through, they've set up an automated system now, and a lot of service connected injuries are overlooked as well. So the amount of numbers is just overwhelming for one organization to be able to take care of thoroughly. That's why it's important for veterans to stay on top, even though how long the process is come sometimes very, very discouraging to stay on top of it because your service connected injuries or that they're service connected and getting a disability rating and having a better life outside of the military should be the number one priority. Um, and one thing I talked to Rob Sweetman and I had on my show, former Navy SEAL, and it stuck with me is we get out of the military, right? We have this very strict schedule of when you wake up, what you got to do, everything else. When we get out of the military, that schedule is no longer there, right? So the onus is on us for that schedule to find that purpose again. We can't make excuses. It's somebody else's job. It's our job now, right? The only time we can really make excuses is the VA's backed up. It's like standing in the grocery line for deli meat. You got too many people there. You don't have time to wait. What do? You leave. A lot of veterans are doing that with the VA right
There's got to be a solution. I mean, can it be, is there a way maybe that certain individuals have I mean, because I'm sure even since COVID, and I hate to say that word, but since COVID, we've seen an increase in depression as it is as a society. So I'm wondering how many people are depressed before they go into the service already, and maybe that's not being caught
now. Absolutely. You know, People don't think about that. They don't think about your traumas or
before.
beforehand and what can trigger the already PTSD that they may not have diagnosed.
Right.
And it adds to it.
So they're not really catching it before. Not really looking for it.
No, they will look for it to a certain extent.
But they go on to other things because they're probably backed up and they don't want to
Yeah,
get too.
well, especially with when we're ramping up for the wars, right? They need bodies, they need numbers. The tattoo policy, they got rid of that. Felonies, they got rid of that. For a certain period of time, they were doing waivers for everything because they needed numbers for a war. You know, and war is a moneymaker in many aspects. A lot of people don't realize that
Oh, it's
side
a
of
huge
war.
moneymaker.
Yeah. Between delivering just the mail or delivering weapons or whatever the case may be, whoever wants their hands in the pie is going to be able to make the money they want to make off of the war.
So let's say that you're running the VA, you're in charge. What would you do?
I think that an overhaul of the system that's in place, not a complete overhaul because they do have a good foundation, but looking into better servicing veterans and their needs, especially if they're going to be deemed 100% disabled, can't work. Finding a job is the biggest crutch right now for veterans. Homelessness.
So I would think, here's an example. I was at a university earlier today, and they had a chapel there, and it's kind of like a praying chapel.
Mhm.
And students go in there and they write letters of whatever they're going through, and then they leave it in a basket, or there's a cross where they stick the letters in. So you see thousands and thousands of these letters in there, and you can see them on the wall. You can even take them out and look at them. I don't know if you're supposed to do that, but we
Yeah.
we did out of curiosity. And the one thing I kept getting today out of looking at those letters, and I'm probably guessing it's probably the same, but a little bit different, is a lot of these students who are so bright and young are afraid what their future holds, even though they're getting a degree. There was one young girl that was concerned about becoming a nurse, and she didn't know she was going to be able to do a good enough job.
Mhm.
I mean, she worried about that. She was worried about letting her parents down. She was worried about, her father not being happy with her grades. And I'm like, you know, it's a challenge, let alone to go to
Yeah.
college, but to have those other things.
Yep.
So for the military, I would feel that, and again, you correct me because I don't have that experience. You do. There's probably the unknown circumstance of what you're going to do, and there's probably some fear. I would think that would add a lot of anxiety in a lot of ways, and probably trigger a lot of other things mentally.
Yeah. So the biggest thing is I think a lot of people, they don't want to accept failure. All right. The thing is, if you turn failure into a positive thing and make it your motivation, and when you fail, you learn how to not do it again and you succeed the next time.
Well, I've always found that when something hits you hard, those are that's the situation typically you don't want to go back and visit
Right. Right.
because and so you do everything in your power the next time to not let it happen.
Absolutely. And the
Not
bit
everybody's that way though, are they?
No, no, not everybody, but I also think that there's a lot of hurdles to get over, especially if you transition out of the military and you don't have a place to go live. Right now, you don't have a job. All right, and being in real estate myself,
Maybe
I've
we didn't talk about that career.
no,
We
no,
talked about
yeah,
we talked about everything else.
yeah,
There's a couple probably things we've left out.
yeah. So being in real estate myself, as being an agent, I know that you're gonna take, possibly up to, especially if you're getting a loan, up to 7 weeks in order.
How long does a VA loan take?
Roughly around 7 weeks,
You think
pretty
it'd be
much any loan.
you'd think it would be quicker, right?
You would think so, but here's the thing. Even though it's a VA loan, all right, it's still a loan. So they have to back it up by, do you have funds? Do you have a job? Right? So you're going to see that you're getting out of the military. There's no job there. You don't have a paycheck. So now how are you going to pay for this mortgage? Right? So that's why a lot of people are having an issue, especially with homelessness, because the house isn't there for them. So how do we fix that? That's the big question.
So that's another question. So you're saying that a lot of the homeless are you saying a lot of the homeless that we have, in the country, a lot of them are veterans?
So 1/3 of the population in the United States are veterans that are homeless.
You know that for sure?
Yes, that's based on studies that I've read up on.
A
Um,
third.
a third of the homeless population across the United States. This includes United States territories as well.
It probably could even be more in this because it's
Could
not
be.
I would think that probably some people don't wanna be found.
Correct.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, it could be like 50% maybe or
Yeah.
more.
And that's even if they say they're a veteran.
Oh,
So how many times I've sent somebody up to the hospital for a psych evaluation, being a police officer, and on the psych evaluation form it asks, veteran status, yes or no. How many times do we check the yes or no block? Most of the time we don't ask because they're in some type of delirium, or hopped up on something where, they're not in their right state of mind,
mhm.
So if we check yes, what does that do? Is it a statistic? Does it trigger aid? What if they say yes and they're not? You know, so
That happens too.
that happens too. The stolen valor thing was a big trend for a while. You got people there, they got U.S. Army, but then they got a different branches patches on there, and or different. They got their awards on their camos, and it's like you can see it a mile away.
It's very sad to be
Yeah,
hearing that this is going on.
yep,
Uh, I'm sure the politicians know about it,
yeah,
but it's just is it something they just don't wanna get involved with? Is it just too big? Is it opening a Pandora's box?
yeah. Well, yes and no. You have to think that, I mean, our country's founded on freedom of speech.
Mhm.
However, when you're impersonating a military member, or a veteran or a police officer, it should be taken more seriously. That's a high standard to be held to. The work that you put into, the training that you get, you should be held to a higher standard. And taking that away from the people that have put the work in, put the time and the effort in, and made it their lifestyle, you're offending them. And that's what it comes down to. It's offensive.
Well, what would happen if somebody pretended to be a doctor?
That's a good question.
It probably would have more repercussions?
Yeah, didn't that was like Goodwill Hunting or some one of those movies where
Oh, yeah, there was what was the name of that movie?
Catch Me If You Can
Yeah,
or
but that's
something.
what and
Yeah,
the guy actually pretended to be a doctor, right?
right,
I'm
right,
sure there's other people that have done the same thing in different
right.
categories.
Yeah,
So, I'm hearing a lot of different things from you, and I have heard this before, but a third of the population being homeless, I haven't heard of. I knew it was high, and it's probably higher than that even actually. But you were the first person that I talked to
Yeah,
that has said that. So where do we? How do we combat this? I mean, because it is kind of a war, right?
it is. And unfortunately, I mean, the VA is just like any other insurance company. They have a certain amount of money. They're able to help the entire populace. They last year alone, they've only housed 30,000 veterans. Now, that statistic, I don't know what era of uh, time in service it was, whether it's just recent veterans, whether it's veterans from, other the Cold War era.
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know what that statistic shows, but last year alone it was only 30,000. If you take that number, all right, 200,000 every single year, all right, transition out of the military. All right, that's a staggering number. Granted, a large amount of that populace is going to be able to move on and do something. Even though everything looks good at face value, a lot of these veterans are struggling because they don't want to say it.
Sure.
You know, the stigma of PTSD, the stigma of, failure, the stigma of depression, you know, we're told that we're warriors. We're told that we can't be broken. All right. The word broken, all right, is something when this record player breaks, right? Just because you have something going on does not mean that you are broken. And that's the biggest message I think that needs to be put out there, that it's not a matter of being fixed, right? Because then you put that stigma back on it, right? It's a matter of how do you make things a little bit better? How do you make it manageable? And you keep pushing forward. Don't take those steps back. As long as you're moving in a forward motion, good things will come.
So I always go into situations. I'm coming kind of an optimist,
Mhm.
but I'm overwhelmed by just what you shared with me because it really bothers me to hear that. I mean, I know our veterans are not really taken care of the way they should, but I guess we're not hearing enough about this in the media. We're hearing things about other countries. We're hearing things about who's running for office.
Mhm.
Not really hearing about our veterans and what they need. And
Right.
I don't understand why we're not focused on that because the freedoms we have in this country are because of our veterans.
Right.
Doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. And the biggest thing too is even though Iraq and Afghanistan is quote done, right? There are military personnel that's deploying all the time. Many different areas around the world. And I'm not talking about duties, just your typical duty stations, Germany, and other duty stations around the world. There are still deployments that happen, so that, Red Friday, remember everybody deployed. All right. And I post it every single Friday. It stands true today. You just don't hear about it in the news because it's not a popular thing to talk about.
Yeah, but the only way something ever gets fixed is to talk about it.
Right.
If you keep sweeping it under the carpet,
Right.
eventually you trip over whatever's under the carpet.
Correct.
So this thing is just going to fester more.
Right.
It's already showing its ugly head by what's going on with the homeless, and the transition to jobs. I mean, it seems like you said. I think that if I'm not mistaken, did you say there needs to be an overhaul,
An overhaul.
a complete overhaul?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a new system in place. When I was coming out, they had TAPS. TAPS is like the baseline. TAP is the transition assistance program. There's a newer program in place that does similar stuff, but I've talked to veterans that have just transitioned. I had one on my show that served with me. Um, George Koss, he was talking about what it was like transitioning out, and he's going through the transition now, right?
How long has he been out?
About maybe a year, right? So
He's still in his mind, probably.
yes, and you're never going to truly be out of the military in a sense, right? You're going to have stuff that reminds you of how you structure your day. Those are valuable lessons of which the military teaches us. Don't lose them, right? Use it and apply it in a positive way. You know, if you go down the road of always being negative, you're going to find negative,
Sure.
you know? So I went down that road, right? every single thing was negative. Stuff at work, stuff outside of work. I couldn't sell my first house. I couldn't, and I kept looking at the negative. Sometimes we need to stop. We need to self-reflect. What am I doing? Not maybe wrong, but what can I do different?
Do you have faith?
I do.
So do you believe sometimes things don't happen to you, they happen for you?
Correct. Sometimes.
I think a majority of the times,
Yeah.
if you I was talking today on my radio show, we were talking about, how some people don't see opportunities because there's so much on their minds and everything is going so quick,
Yeah.
and there's things you don't see sometimes that are actually good things, signs.
Correct.
And usually when you get to be a certain age, you see them more because you're trying to find a way not to be like you just said.
Yeah.
You try to look at the positive of things.
Right.
And I don't believe in coincidence. I do believe that things do, maybe you think differently, but I do believe there's always something positive. It may not start out that way, but down the road, I think things work out if you're able to do that. I should go crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that people need to realize that, there's no such thing really as luck, right?
Right.
It's multiple failures and then you
Sure.
have your successes,
Well, you saw
you know?
I don't know if you've seen the quote about Michael Jordan and how many times he missed a free throw or game winning shot. That's why I succeed.
Mhm.
It's over and over. It's rep after rep, and just continuing until you make it.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
then
And
it happens at the right time when it's supposed to happen.
yeah, and it's one of those lessons that you gotta continue on throughout your life. You're gonna have many transitions throughout your life. You're gonna have many failures. You're gonna have many successes. But as long as you continue to move forward and those successes become a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger, you're gonna have the failure. All right. But along with that, if you keep showing up, you keep doing it,
It's going to happen.
it's gonna happen.
Sure. So let's talk about government and the VA, and let's talk about the private sector and 501c3s, nonprofits. Do you feel that nonprofits are more efficient than government-run organizations?
Sometimes.
Okay,
Only say that because they've gotten a stigma over the years because there's been people that have used and abused 501, nonprofits.
sure,
And it's created a bad image, same as stolen valor, right? It's created a bad image on the nonprofits, which, I make sure that I vet who I'm talking to, who I'm dealing with, because I want to make sure the money is going directly to veterans, their families, Gold Star families. Big example is Wounded Warrior Project. They had a huge like embezzlement thing a couple years ago,
okay,
and so it put a bad name on the program, that organization. And you don't really hear about that organization too much anymore. You do here and there, but not as prevalent as it was before. And I think that really kind of started the gears of people not trusting the 501 nonprofits. Um, and so I want to make sure that anybody that I put my name behind, is truly there for good. They're there for, our veterans. They're there for our police officers, um, their families, the first responders. It's a thankless job,
sure.
and I think it's one of those things that people have to do the research on their own. You can Google and you're going to have so many
Oh yeah,
nonprofits that come up, but how do you make sure that this one is legitimate? Or a lot of people go, I want my money going directly to this, you know, how do you know that?
yeah, because there's been some cases where their salaries are being paid for more than the money that's being utilized for.
Correct. Yeah.
But I've understood that they've cracked down on more of those types of situations too.
Yeah, there's been a little bit. The main structure for the nonprofits, I think, is a good baseline for nonprofits to be organized and created. Me personally, I think if you create a nonprofit, the funds in which go, to the organization. Granted, if the person is working there, there has to be some type of salary, but there should be a balance.
You should. To get good talent, they say you have to be able to pay for it. What I keep hearing.
Yep.
And so the reason I brought that up is because I'm trying to figure out, what the solution would be to getting a handle on this. And I'm wondering if maybe there needs to be more interaction than there is. I mean, to me, it seems like it's getting worse.
It does seem like it seems like a lot of people are just, willy-nilly popping up a nonprofit organization. Their intent is good, in the beginning. Your intent is always to
Sure.
do better, help other people. That's why nonprofits generally get started. I'm not a nonprofit. Everlasting Veteran is not a nonprofit, and I've made that very clear.
You
However
help veterans.
however, my donations are going to vetted nonprofits in which I
Okay.
know firsthand that
You've
if
investigated them.
I've investigated them, I've talked to the people personally, I see what they're doing, even if it's putting up, Purple Heart recipient parking spots to honor, our
Sure.
Purple Heart recipients, veteran parking spots to honor our veterans. That stuff costs money.
Sure.
In order to do anything, you have to make money to spend money,
Mhm.
you know, and that's on the nonprofit side and that's on the profitable side. That's business. All right. And I run into a lot of people so many times in my personal life, right, that you're either for me, against me, or with me. Right. And whatever field you want to pick and choose, honestly, I don't care because I know wholeheartedly who I am in my mission. And if you only want to show up when something's successful to get behind it, I know that you're not wholeheartedly here with me
That's a good
for the
point.
mission from the beginning, you know? And I've had this conversation with Ranger Rick down in North Carolina, and he has the same attitude towards it. You either support me or you don't. If you don't support me, I'm not offended, right? I'm going to continue the mission, you know? So
So if there's anybody out there that's listening, what one last thing would you like to say?
for the veterans, keep moving forward. All right. You want to keep moving forward because if you keep moving forward, good things will happen. And for first responders out there, you got to do the same thing. All right. What we're doing is good for our communities and everybody else that supports Everlasting Veteran, first responders, our veterans, right? You're supporting a network that supports you. We're part of the community. Just because we're veterans, it doesn't mean that we're any different. We're part of the community. Let's work together.
Well, I appreciate your time visiting, of course, taking time out of your vacation
I
to come
appreciate it.
by. I appreciate everything you're doing. And if you have ideas or thoughts on how we can, help in any way, if you need help with anything, please let us know. And his information, of course, is there at the bottom of the screen. Um, so you're a podcaster, you're a father also, a
Father,
father,
yeah,
a husband, police officer,
realtor.
realtor, Army veteran. What else?
I have 2 LLCs now.
Uh,
You know,
So you're more. If you were a
yeah,
knife, you're more than
yeah,
more than a Swiss Army knife.
yeah, yeah. And I just got my logo and name trademarked
What?
because I want to show that I'm all about this.
You
Like,
got your name and trademarked?
yes, Everlasting Veteran is trademarked.
Okay, I thought you meant your first and last
Oh
name.
no! Oh yeah, Ryan Landry's trademarked. Yeah, nobody else can call their kid Ryan Landry.
Hey, you know what? It get you some press,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
I never thought about that.
It's good.
You know.
Imagine the press. I appreciate you being
Yeah,
on the show.
I appreciate it. Thank
Thanks
you.
for everything.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, check his podcast out. And anybody else out there that wants to support the military or you have ideas of what we can do to help our military, the information's there with his website. Our information's also there too. So we're always available. And thanks to my sponsors who believe in what we're doing. Thanks for your support, your belief, and everybody take care and God bless.